Good morning, everyone. My name is Miriam Hewitt. I'm Assistant Director at the Center for Public Service, and I welcome you to this session of the Center for Public Service Speaker Series. Today's talk is entitled Demystifying the IRB, Pulling Back the Curtain on the Wizard. I'm grateful to Cecilia Brown, who is Compliance and Education Coordinator in the Human Resource Protection Office for facilitating this discussion, as well as for colleagues Thiri, DeVoe, and Tyrus, Steward, who are both IRB compliance analysts, and Vania, McKendall, who is regulatory compliance specialist. Thank you all for being here, and I will pass it on to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to speak to you today regarding more along the lines of the demystifying the piece of the IRB regarding community engagement, community members being involved in research studies. Thiri and Tyrus are going to be here to be able to help facilitate and answer questions and things of that nature. And Vania is going to basically, as our newest team member, we welcome her and want to get her involved in the learning process as well and what we do in our office. So I am going to do my best to share my screen without causing too many issues. Can everybody see the screen? Okay, good. So biggest thing that I have is always this bar in Zoom being in the way when I'm trying to do presentations, but it's okay. So we are, again, talking about this demystifying the submission process for the IRB, especially when it is involving community-based research. So first and foremost, what is community-based research? So community-based research is research that is conducted as an equal partnership between academic investigators and members of the community. Very important, very necessary, especially when we start talking about negative influences on research that have happened over the years. I'm sure everybody's heard of Tuskegee and the Nazi experiments and everything like that. A lot of those community-based research submissions and studies now are intended to help to combat the negative influence that research has in the community based on their experiences and what they've heard from these negative research studies. So in community-based research projects, the community participates fully in all aspects of the research. They often help with design of the research study, and they are also involved in combating issues, solving problems. There is a common goal involved in research when we have a community partner, because they live in the area where the research is actually being conducted and they want to see it succeed, especially when they're given the information and they can disseminate it to the different members of their community. Where research is being conducted in communities, the PI is encouraged to involve members of the community in every aspect of the research process. So the benefits of community engagement. Community engaged research can build trust between researchers and communities. It can encourage participation among underrepresented groups and enhance the relevance as well as the uptake of research findings. So we do want to always make sure that we try to involve community, especially in research projects where you don't always have, where you have underserved populations, especially. HRPO role, our role in community-based research, we will assist the PI in developing arrangements between community partners and the actual academic research team. The institution assures that the IRB has the appropriate expertise to review these community-based research studies. Inclusion, we also make sure that we have members or consultants on our board that have the expertise in community-based participatory research. Now I'm gonna bring up some questions and we're gonna go through some things that the PI should ask when they are developing these community-based research projects. So when you're in formulation of your study and you want to utilize community research partners, these are, so the background, the purpose and the objectives of the study. How was the community involved or consulted in defining the needs of the research that you're actually going to be conducting? Who came up with the research objectives and how? Did it involve just a academic researcher, or did it involve a collaboration with community members? Is the research really justified with respect to community concerns? Are there concrete actions and outcomes that will come out of the community-based research that you're intending on doing? And who will benefit and how? Is there only a benefit for the researcher being able to develop your proposals, develop your protocols, develop your publications, or is there actually a benefit to the community that you are going to be investing in? The research methodology, how will the community be involved in the research and at what level? Do you expect that the community partners will actually be participating in helping you recruit your subject population? Will they be involved in consenting? Will they be involved in administering surveys, participating in interviews, things of that nature? If they are going to be involved in the actual research design and the recruitment, what training will you allow them to have, or will you assist them with getting? How will you train them to be able to conduct ethical research involving human subjects? Research procedures that you need to think about. Will the methods used be sensitive and appropriate to the various communities, considering their literacy levels, language barriers, things of that nature, and cultural sensitivities? And how will scientific rigor and accessibility be balanced? Will they be able to understand what you're doing from a scientific level? You're answering a science question. They are not scientifically based people in most cases. So how will you translate everything, your research procedures, so that they understand? The participants in your research, are the appropriate people being included to get the questions answered that you are trying to, your hypothesis, is your hypothesis going to be answered with the participants that you're intending on enrolling? Are they going to be service providers, community members, leaders in the community, etc.? How will the research team protect vulnerable groups, including children, fetuses, if you're going to be prisoners, if they're going to be involved in your research? You have to make adequate protections for those vulnerable groups. Will the research process include or engage marginalized or disenfranchised community members, and how? We do want to ensure that if you are conducting human subjects research that involves, just as an example, homeless population, that they are, in fact, that they are not the only group, that they are not being targeted in any way, that there's no appearance of that. Is there a reason to exclude some people, and why? So you want to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to participate in your research, but if you choose not to include a particular group, just ensure that the justification is provided. Recruitment into your study. What provisions have been put in place to ensure culturally relevant and appropriate recruitment strategies and materials are utilized? Basically, if you're going to be recruiting a Spanish-speaking population, do you have recruitment materials in Spanish? Have you considered your informed consents be translated? Things of that nature, so that they can easily understand and provide or be fully informed in order to actually become enrolled in your study. Have power relationships been considered in the recruitment strategies to minimize coercion? When you're dealing with community research, and any research for that matter, if you have someone who is influential over a group of people, how are you ensuring that this influential person is not guiding these people into research based on, again, their influence, and not them having the voluntary capacity to engage in the research? who approaches people about the study and how. Again, dealing with community-based research, are you as the researcher, as an academic researcher, reaching out to the actual study participants or potential participants, or are members of the community actually doing the recruitment process for you? And again, how does that look? What processes are you putting into place to ensure that everyone has adequate education training to be able to recruit participants? Risks and benefits. What are the risks and benefits of the research for the communities and for the community as a whole, and for the individuals within that community? When you're talking about community-based research, are the risks being presented honestly, ensuring that everything that you do is communicated in an honest, ethical manner? Because again, your biggest goal in community-based research is building that trust with the community so that they have the comfort level to actually hear you out, to be able to enter their community, be able to try to conduct this research there. And how will risks be minimized to the population? Before I jump into the next thing, are there any questions so far? I don't have my chat up and everything, so it's hard for me to, let's see, guys. No? Okay. I will keep going then. Another area of privacy and confidentiality is definitely something that you want to consider. You want to think about where your data will be stored. In a lot of community-based research, you are housed in a community-centered location so that the community has access to you relatively easily. In a lot of cases, not always the case, but when you are outside of your locked office at your building at Tulane, and you don't have the locked password or locked file cabinets and everything that you may have here, how will you ensure that your data is being stored? If you're collecting survey information, consent forms and everything, how are you going to ensure that that data is protected? How will you have access to the data, and who will have access to the data? Will the community members that are involved in your research have access to identifiable information? Will only your research team have access? How will they access it? Will it be via computer? Will it be paper files? So it's just things, again, these are all things for you to think about when you're developing your study. Additional things to think about is what processes will be put into place to be inclusive about data analysis and yet maintain the privacy of participants. In community research, you want the community members that helped you design the study to have involvement in the analysis of the data, but you do want to ensure that you are, again, maintaining the privacy of the participants because it is required for research. What will be the rules for working with transcripts or surveys with identifying information? Are you planning on de-identifying surveys before they're analyzed? Are you planning on collecting identifiers when you do collect consent and the surveys, and when you are doing transcripts from interviews or things like that? Will you record the names of the people involved? Will you record the names of the community members? These types of things need to be thought about because they need to be disclosed to the participant and the community members prior to them being involved in your study. How will boundaries between multiple roles be maintained? If you are dealing in community members or community research, you usually have a contact within that community. And it's how do you oversee them, but ensure that the lines don't get blurred between researcher and friend, or researcher and your next door neighbor in some cases, as an example. How do you separate and ensure that you're wearing these two different hats so that you can maintain the integrity of your data and also be kind and understanding to the community? So it's just, again, things to think about. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. Can y'all still see my screen?
No, it's not shared anymore. The PowerPoint, you mean?
Okay, yeah, that's what I was talking about. Okay, I hit the, again, sorry. Good for hitting a button that does things. Okay, here we go. Back. And now we're gonna go run back through these real quick. Sorry. Okay, there we go. Next slide, compensation. How will people be reimbursed for their time and their efforts without becoming coercive? If you are involving community members, there are times when community members that are assisting in recruiting could be compensated. We don't necessarily recommend that because they are acting as members of the research team. However, you do have the opportunity to do that, but again, have to provide the justification, and you need to ensure that what they are being compensated isn't, they're not being basically, for lack of a better term, being bribed to guide their community members to you for your research. So you have to think about all of those things. How will compensation be approached? Will you give them gift cards? How will you let them know that they will be compensated? Is it going to be included in your informed consent? Are you going to include in your recruitment material that compensation may be offered? How do you intend to inform them without it being a coercive act? You're not putting big dollar signs on your, like this thing, this little icon down here is a big no-no. You don't tell people you're going to basically identify, you're going to give them bags of money to participate in things, that we try to make sure that when we are doing these, when we are recruiting and we are compensating, that we do it in the minimalist way possible as far as the identification of it prior to them consenting to be a part of the study. I hope that makes sense. What provisions have been made for minimizing the barriers to participate in research, and who is managing the budget? So when we talk about managing the barriers, are you going to be providing food? Are you going to be offering child care so that people have the opportunity to participate? And if your research goes over 2 or 3 hours, are you going to be providing a snack? Are you going to be providing lunch? Are you going to be doing things that help ease their involvement? And if you do have these things, how are you budgeting? Who's in charge of your budget to make sure that costs don't exceed the money that you have coming in? And how are these decisions negotiated? Will you involve the community members, your partners, in these decisions prior to making them? Again, a lot of things that a lot of people don't always think about until it actually happens. But just again, an identifier, let you know what you should look at prior to starting your research. Consider all of this. Conflicts of interest. This is kind of reminiscent to a couple of slides ago, but what happens when the PI or research staff is the friend, the peer, the service provider, the doctor, the nurse, the social worker for the community partners? Is there again, undue coercion or undue influence that could be perceived when you are in these communities, and how do you combat that conflict? If you have the hero complex a lot of times, or the savior complex in some situations, you're the doctor of this group, of a clinic in this community. They trust you with everything. So if you decide to come in and do research, it could be conceived as coercive or perceived as coercive if everyone just decides to volunteer for your research because you're that person to them. They trust you. They don't have any, they're not going to ask questions. It's just combating the appearance of impropriety, and just thinking about those types of things. And again, how will the power differentials be appropriately acknowledged and negotiated? It's, again, just the thought process, the concepts, the discussions that need to be had before your research is implemented, so you can, in fact, in the discussion with the community members, address these issues, combat them, and ensure that they don't become a problem when the research starts. again, better to have the conversation on the front end than to try to fix it on the back end. The informed consent process is one of the biggest things that we in the HRPO preach, because it is the one section or the one area of research that usually causes the most holdup, because this is the major piece of what the participants see. And this is how they basically state that they are going to participate in research, confirm that they understand what the research is about, and basically attest to having provided fully informed voluntary consent. So what does informed consent mean for vulnerable populations, the children that could be involved in your research, mentally ill, developmentally challenged, but it also does include non-English speakers and things, people of that nature. So how do you in fact account for the limitations that they may have in providing consent for your study? Again, like saying with the non-English speakers, ensuring that we have translated documents for them. And vulnerable populations for children, we do have assent forms for children to ensure that we have a consent document, but that is formulated to be on the level that children can understand. And with children being involved, there's usually or always a parental permission form that also needs to be provided, that needs to be signed, so that the parent then understands what the child will be involved in the research, and the parent can also give their consent. For developmentally challenged members of our studies or the mentally ill, there are additional safeguards for them that have to be put into place when it comes to consenting. And usually that involves them having basically an advocate, someone that they trust, that they know, that gives them all of the information on their level with consent. And that person also has to sign as a witness that the participant has provided fully informed consent, everything was explained to them, and that they understand and are willing to participate in the research. So they're legally authorized representative in most cases. What processes are in place for gathering individual consent? So how do you plan to consent the patient or the participant in your research? Do you intend to just walk up to them in the middle of a ceremony that's going on? I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out the best community example to use. But if you walk into a community center in a particular neighborhood, are you intending on just handing people consent forms? How do you plan to gather the consent? Are you planning on asking them to come to the side, having a private room for them to consent and things of that nature? When written informed consent is not being obtained, how are you explaining that within the guidelines of your research? We do have a method of requesting a waiver of documentation of consent or a waiver of informed consent, depending on the situations for the research. And are you accounting for the reasons why informed consent is not something that you think you could reasonably obtain in order to conduct your research? You do have communities that do not like paper, that do not like to sign their name, that don't understand it. So how do you then involve them? How do you include them, but still provide them the opportunity to provide consent? So just explanation, information is important, especially when it comes to informed consent. What processes are in place for gathering community consent? Basically, large groups consenting to be a part of focus groups, things of that nature. And if you're going to be doing a group consenting method or a community consenting method, how will you do that? So again, things to think about. Where minors are to be included as participants, how will the assent be obtained? So similar as what I said with vulnerable populations, just ensuring that children are given the opportunity to consent. We do not expect consent to be obtained or assent to be obtained from children under the age of 6. So we do have 7 we do have assent form templates for you in the HRPO. They're all accessible on our website in an IRB manager. So you have consent templates, you have assent templates, parental permission templates. We try to make this as easy for you as possible. So we do have all of that information for you as guidance to use when you're conducting your research. Are the consent processes culturally sensitive and appropriate for populations being included? We do have in the HRPO a lot of international research that does involve not only the research team at Tulane, but community members that actually live in communities in these rural areas in just say Honduras or in China, in the Congo, and we don't have researchers that actually deal directly in these situations. The community members are there. They understand what the cultural sensitivities are. In some cases, you do not talk to women. You do not talk to men. In some situations, you don't talk to men. You don't talk to children. We want to ensure that we are allowing for the sensitivity of the community that we're conducting research in, because we don't want to offend anybody. We don't want there to be any uproar or conflicts that come from offending someone in these community situations. So a lot of times community involvement is important and necessary for you to conduct your research in a safe manner. The outcomes and results of your research is very important when it comes to community research, because they are involved again in the design, in the design of the study. They deserve to know what the outcome is and what the results are. So how will the research be disseminated to your academic audiences as far as your publications and things of that nature? And how will the research be disseminated to your community audiences? You need to be able to ensure that they are involved in and made aware of, again, the results and the outcomes of your research, because they're the reason that you have it. And what are new ways that research will be acted upon to ensure community policy and social change? So once you actually find ways that you can help the community, hopefully, with the results of your research, how will you assist them in implementing it? What will you offer? Because it doesn't end when your research stops. Your community involvement technically doesn't end, because you become basically a part of the community with regards to the research. And we have researchers that conduct research in particular communities for years and years. We have research that's been going on since Katrina in certain areas, and they just continue to go back and help this particular community because they basically become a part of them. So it doesn't just end when the results are found. So things for ongoing reflection and partnership development, that when you're conducting research, you do need to ensure that you put something in writing that regarding the partnership agreement with your community members. The IRB will look for if you're going into a community center or something like that, and you're going to be dealing with certain members of that group and certain members of the community, we will want to see that they've actually agreed to participate in your research as a community member. We want to ensure or ask what internal processes and evaluation mechanisms are going to be in place for you to evaluate the actual collection of the research, the collection of the data by the community members, the consenting process. How will you ensure that everything is being conducted above board within your research requirements in accordance with federal regulations, Tulane requirements, to basically just make sure that all your bases are covered. When plans change to accommodate community concerns, which they do in community research, you find out you offended one group and you're going to make some changes. How will those changes be communicated to the IRB? Just ensure that you have thought about it. You're going to have to submit an amendment to whatever research you've gotten approved, just to ensure that the IRB is notified that they have reviewed and approved your changes prior to you implementing them, which is important. So just to make sure you understand that once things are put into place, you've gone through all of these steps to try to prepare, things always change, and change is okay. And we do allow for change, so don't think that we don't. So training is important for community partners. There are training requirements for investigators, key personnel, and other members of your research team. If you are intending on including community partners in that research design, then they are considered other members of your research team, and they will have to complete a 2-lane required city training, or a 2-lane, something that is equivalent to the 2-lane requirements that you have, either the Group 1 biomedical city training, the Group 2 social behavioral city training. In some cases, for international research studies where it's not possible for the community members to have access to a computer, to have they have issues with language barriers or things like that. There are ways to get around that. There are waivers. There's a waiver that can be requested from the HRPO regarding those community members that cannot physically do a city training or something along those lines, a formal training. You as an investigator are responsible for ensuring that your community partners have that training. We would prefer city training if possible, but if they can't get that, you have access to city. You can train them on the information that you had to learn as an investigator, and the responsibilities for, again, informed consent, recruitment, ethical research, and you provide us with documentation that you have in fact conducted this training. You feel that they are prepared to conduct research under the auspices of 2-lane, and their process can, or your plan for recruitment with community members can proceed once it's approved. So the PI, again, is still responsible for conducting training with the members that cannot conduct or cannot participate in those city trainings. And it has to take place prior to any data being collected, any research activity being conducted by these individuals. So again, the waiver is possible, and you will, if the individuals can provide documentation verifying that they have successfully completed some human research training, either from you or from a city equivalent, because NIH had trainings at one point where they would allow community members to participate in that and receive an ethics training certificate. But the thing is, if you do have those, most of those outside trainings do have their own expiration date, and you have to honor the expiration date from that organization. There are continuing education requirements that researchers also have to do that does also apply for your community members. So just like at 2-lane, if they do city, just like your city certificates, they last for 4 years, and they'll have to renew them every 4 years, just as you would. Or like I said, if they have an outside training that they want to utilize, if theirs only lasts for 3 years, they have to renew them every 3 years to honor that training requirement. So what does the IRB need to know? We've gone through all of these things that you should think about prior to submitting, or as you are developing your research design. We are the who, what, when, where, why, and how. That's what we need to know. We are, where's your study location? Where's it going to be? Where are you conducting your research? When is the time period that you are going, it's going to take you to complete your research? What's the time commitment for the participants that are going to be involved? How will the data be collected? How will you use it? How will you disseminate it? What data are you collecting? Is it surveys? Is it specimens, blood collection? What are you doing? Why is the study being done? What's the hypothesis? What do you intend to find or hopefully discover? Who are your participants? Who are your researchers? Who's involved in your research? So basically everything that I told you need to think about is exactly what we need. So if you cover all of that, you usually are pretty good. The criteria for, just from, again, the IRB side now, once you've actually submitted your study, these are the criteria that we have to, again, abide by per the federal regulations to be able to approve your research study. So all of these, again, fall in line with those things that I told you need to think about prior to submitting. So the risks to the subjects, the subject selection, is it equitable? What is your subject population going to be? The consent process that you're going to utilize. Are you going to be collecting consent? Are you not? Is it going to be assent? Is it going to be, do you need parental permission? How will consent be documented? Do the members of your community that are going to be participating in your research, are they able to sign? Do they have, culturally, do they want to sign documents, things of that nature? You got to think about how all of that's going to be done and report that to us. How do you plan to protect the data safety? How do you plan to ensure that everything, do you have a data safety monitoring plan? Is the plan described adequately for the IRB to understand in the protocol in your application? And are there any potential issues that you can identify with the plan, and how do you justify moving forward with them? The privacy and confidentiality of all of your data and the confidentiality of your participants, vulnerable populations, if you're going to be, again, enrolling children, non-English speakers, disadvantaged members of your community. Have you accounted for all of this in your application and your protocol? Those things are required for IRB approval. The IRB process, that's the life of the submission. Once you actually start your application and submit it to our office, the protocols are reviewed on a first come, first served basis, as long as they are not greater than minimal risk. If they're minimal risk research, they're reviewed first come, first served. If they are greater than minimal, we do have to convene the IRB, either the Social Behavioral Board or the Biomedical Board, to actually review the studies, and those will schedule those as, well, we have the schedule for those already in place. It's on our website and you're welcome to look at it. Once the protocol gets to the office, the HRPO staff will review the submission for completeness. We will contact the PI and the study team to make any necessary changes. Once the submission is deemed complete, it's sent to the IRB chair to either be designated to an IRB member, assigned to an IRB member for review, or set to the convened meeting agenda, depending on greater than minimal risk or minimal risk. Once it's reviewed, the submission comes back to the HRPO, and we process the determination letters and, stamp consent forms if they're needed and everything like that. And we send the notification to the PI and the study team. For any submissions that do require modification, if we can, then we do return those to the study team so that they can make the modifications, and then the process starts again. Basically, we go back to the beginning. Once the modifications are made, once the modifications come back into the office, they're reviewed again, first come, first serve. The staff reviews it. If everything is deemed complete, goes back to the chair. It's assigned again for a review. Then if it's approved, great. Then you're able to go forward with your research. And the next thing we want to see is your continuing review or any amendments that come up that need to be reviewed and approved to the IRB before you can initiate those modifications to your research. Okay, so one thing that I was asked to do was provide some IRB tips and tricks to try to ensure that you all understand that we are not this scary, crazy body of people that you cannot find, that you cannot talk to, that you can't reach out to. I saw a few of the names of the people that have come into the session, and I know I've talked to a few of you personally. I know some of my colleagues have talked to you on an extensive basis. We are here. We are here to help. We are not the big bad IRB. We are. That's why it's the demystifying piece is just to ensure you that we are accessible. And if you have problems, you can call us. But here are some easy tips and tricks that serve us well when we do tell people to use them, okay? I can't, I'm on my laptop, y'all, I'm sorry. Biggest tip, read. When we do send back these studies to you for modifications, we put extensive notes in. We provide them to you. The board provides them to you. We give them to you so that you can make all the modifications necessary to be able to submit and get your approval. The biggest problem we have is people miss half of the things that we send because they don't read them all. They do a few, oh, that's good, sounds good, send it back, and then we have to send it back again and start all over again. It delays the process. Next thing you know, you're yelling at us because this is taking 6 weeks, but I sent it back to you 6 times. I'm sorry, I asked you for the same thing over and over. If you read, it does usually help, and it does minimize a lot of the back and forth. The time works, and things go great. So, there's also in your submission process, when you after you have done all of those wonderful things I told you to look at before you submit to us, when you're developing your protocol and everything like that, you've done all of these things. Before you send it in, read your protocol, read your consent form, read your application. Because normally what happens is you develop this wonderful protocol. Then when you go into your consent form, you start looking at some of the things in the template, like, oh, well, you know what? I think we're gonna do this instead. But you don't go back and change your protocol. So when it comes to us, we have things that say 2 different things. And again, we have to send it back for you to try and correct it. So usually what happens, if you run through it one more time, run through all 3 documents, then usually you catch everything, or majority of things, and they're just minor things that need to go back. Minor, simple things. A lot of people also ask us, why do we have to submit 3 of the same thing? The protocol says the same thing. The consent form says that the application says, why do we have to do it? My biggest thing, and the way I explain it to everybody, you have 3 different sets of documents that go to 3 different people. The application is for the IRB to review. That's the only thing we actually are supposed to look at when it comes to your submission. The protocol is for your study team. Your study team uses that as their guide, their grand book of knowledge to know how your study is supposed to be conducted. Your consent form is the only thing your subjects or your participants see in order to ensure that so they can provide that fully informed consent to participate in the research. If the 3 things are being done in 3 different ways, then your study's not going to work. Our goal is to help you ensure that that everybody's getting the same information. Okay, so that's reading is number 1, so important when it comes to all of our stuff, because that's what we do. We sit here and we read your research studies all day. So if you read it first, it usually makes it a whole lot easier. Next thing, biggest question that we get, do I need to submit to the IRB? I'm doing this, I don't think I need to submit. And then a lot of times people just move forward and go ahead and do their research. And when you go to publish, your publisher tells you where's your letter from the IRB. Oh, I didn't get one. I didn't think I needed one. Okay, they tell you they can't publish your research because you conducted your research without an IRB determination. You then call us and we say, sorry, we can't give you something that we can't say that what you did didn't require IRB review because you did it before you told us about it. We cannot retroactively issue a determination. So when in doubt, submit. submit to us. Tell us what you're doing. We can issue you a determination that says what you are doing is not human subjects research and doesn't require IRB review. And it's better for you to have that formal document from us at the beginning than to try again to get through publication without having it, because they won't let you. Not any responsible publication, you know. So that is the biggest part of my presentation. I am done. Those are the biggest tips and tricks that we have. If you have any questions, please, number one, feel free to jump in and ask. Tyrus and Thiri are monitoring or looking at the chat and everything like that, but we are here to answer questions for you. But we are accessible. If you need us, call us. We have our website. We have training requests tabs on our website that you can easily request a training. We have office hours twice a week that we usually just sit and hope that somebody calls us to do. So we block out a couple hours every 4 hours every week to talk to any researcher, answer any question. But a lot of times they don't realize that we offer it. So, hey, I'm putting it out there. I'm expecting to be busy now. So, are there any questions from anybody? I see Lindsay Fields just put her hand up.
I was just giving you a little clap because
that's what that was. I'm sorry. I got the icons. My children laugh at me because
I'm not very good at them either. So I debated.
It was a hand raise. Well,
but
thank you. Thank you. And I saw Tamar put in a lovely little note. I appreciate that.
Well, it's the truth. Thank you very much. I second the hand clap.
Again, we don't just offer trainings to individuals. Tamar's class needed some guidance, and we were able to sit down with her first, and then, we offered it to her class, but she got everything she needed. She was able to guide them. They got their determination, and they're moving forward with what they're doing. So, I know a lot of times you hear things about the IRB and you get scared to say anything, ask the questions or whatever, but we are not scary people. We're honestly people. We love to talk about what we do. And we're happy to help you in any way that we can.
Cecilia, you mentioned earlier the city training for community partners who partake in the research. I know that this is a question that came up recently from a faculty. And can you elaborate on how the training is made available for community partners in this case?
This actually came up for us recently too. Tyrus and I did a meeting last week, I think, and we had a similar situation come up. And so I got some additional clarification and some authorization from our powers that be. So community members are still required, if they're going to be, again, interacting with participants in a research capacity, they have to do the same training that any other member of your research staff would do. Tulane is willing to allow your community members to sign in and sign up for City, the same City program that you do. They will list Tulane University as their institutional affiliation, and they can complete the Group 1 or the Group 2 City training, depending on the research that you're doing. If you're doing biomedical or social behavioral research, they can complete the conflict of interest mini course just as you would. You don't have to include your community members on your application because they will not technically fall under Tulane institutional oversight, because we're only allowed to oversee research conducted by Tulane affiliates. Because they technically are not affiliated with the institution, they cannot be on your application, but they can participate in your research under the guidance of the PI. But the PI is responsible for ensuring that they do complete these city trainings. And it is, once they complete it, they can get their city certificate, and you can store that in your research, your research materials for your study staff, to keep a record of the fact of who you have overseen complete the training. If you can't if they can't complete the training because they don't have computer access, if they don't, they're not computer literate, computer savvy, a lot of people aren't, especially depending on the area and a lot of economically disadvantaged people don't have the option. So you, as the investigator, can in fact train them in the same manner of city. You can access the modules that you completed and provide them and train them on the information, give them the same training that you got, and it will suffice. You can state that this community member could not complete this training. You can request that waiver, again, a waiver of the formal requirement, and tell us that you conducted a formal training, you did it, you attest to the fact that they've completed it, and they can move forward. Dr. Amy, I see your hand up.
I have a related question to that. So sometimes I have students who volunteer on my research projects and conduct the research with me. Oftentimes there are two-lane students, and so that's no problem, but sometimes I hear from students that are not two-lane students. So in that case, do they, can I include them by having them do the two-lane city training, or should I have them do the city training through some other method? And do I put them on the application or not?
Now that would depend on if those students are actually affiliated with another institution, but they're working with you. Let's just say it's LSU students. Those students have an institutional oversight committee. They have their IRB at LSU that would oversee their involvement in any research. So we would then require them to be on an LSU application to participate in your research. We do allow for collaborative research at Tulane. So we can do it I'm going to call it an abbreviated version of the research process or the application process, because you will have your approved IRB submission at Tulane. They will then submit a abbreviated version of that, what's called a facilitated review, as opposed to the expedited or the full board review that's conducted at Tulane. They will submit that to the LSU IRB. We can, in fact, LSU can rely on our IRB approval if we're the ones that have actually approved the research first. So they don't have to do the formal regulatory review for their researcher to be involved in the study. They have their own requirements for city or any research and ethical training that their student would have to abide by, but they could participate on our study if we have entered into that reliance agreement. So it is possible for students outside of Tulane to participate in your research, but if they do have an institution, that it's a requirement that their institution be notified so that their institution can provide them with the oversight that's required.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. Anybody else?
As a follow-up to your tips and tricks, what are the main, I would say, what is the recurring feedback that you find yourself giving for this kind of research, or pitfalls that you see happening?
I know for me, it's usually the training piece. It's usually that requirement for training, and a lot of PIs wonder, how do I actually get it done? And again, this is why we are ensuring that we say that you do have the option for your community members to complete the city training through Tulane. So you do have a means and a method of them actually getting and obtaining the appropriate or the required training. So that's the biggest thing. How do I get them trained? How do I do this? That's my experience. I'm not sure if Thiri and Tyrus may have something different.
Yeah, I would say in addition to that one, inconsistency between the protocol and informed consent forms. So everything, like Cecilia mentioned earlier, just making sure that everything that you're putting in our applications, in your informed consent forms and your protocol all line up.
Okay. There, you good?
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, that's the biggest 2 points, I think. And that's why that read thing is my go-to with every presentation that I do when I'm asked, well, what's the biggest problem the IRB has? And it's that.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna add one more. Also, failure to communicate. Because yeah, for some reason, people think we're inaccessible. Just if you have an issue, a question, you can call, you can email us. There's multiple ways to reach us to get assistance with any of your studies.
I don't know how many of you talk to other researchers, because we have some that just pop by the office. We're sitting in here. People don't realize that we literally are here. And we sit in here all day, and we have researchers that will pop in. We don't necessarily encourage it with COVID right now, but if you want to make an appointment, we can definitely schedule something. We can do Zoom meetings. Zoom is amazing right now for us. We can talk to anybody and everybody. Doesn't matter where they are. I love my monthly call with Puerto Rico. We have research happening in Puerto Rico, and I talk to them a couple times a month. And so I love finding out what's happening. We can be reached anywhere by anyone.
Are there any additional questions? All right, it doesn't look like it. In the chat, let's see. Contact info. Yes, this is being recorded. It'll be, I'll send a follow-up email with the CPS YouTube channel where it'll be uploaded by early next week. Cecilia, would you be willing to share your PowerPoint so I can send to the people who've attended and they can pull it up as reminders of different steps in the process and things to think about before?
100%. I'll send it to you right now.
Okay, awesome. And then I'll share your contact info as well in that email. Well,
that's fine. Now,
I do see a question.
I usually just pick a name off the website. I love that.
Is there a better way, or
Like
whoever
somebody
people
on the website,
contact?
which is fine.
Okay,
But
they'll be
there
directed.
is a better way. On our website, we do have a link on our website to Let's Talk, and it's basically just a information platform. You can ask any question that you like. You can pick the topic and everything, and we assign it to the person that can best answer the question. So that is a quick and easy way to do it. It's actually off to the side on, like if you go on our main page, off to the side, there's like this blue tab that says Contact HRPO. And you just fill it out and you fill out the information, and again, we assign it to the appropriate person. You don't have to guess who's who. But if you have your favorite person.
Yeah, and you can just call the office. Any of us can assist.
Yep. Call the office. Email us irbmain@tulane.edu. We're all here.
Thank you so much for enlightening us and providing that really informational session. Thank you all for attending, and have a good rest of the day.